and welcome to another 8/16/32-bit. I'm Rob, and as you've already seen today, we're looking at the Atari Jaguar and why it failed. Now, I'm sure pretty much everyone who's watching this video already knows that the Atari Jaguar was an infamous failure, and indeed it's the machine that withdrew Atari from the consumer hardware market, at least until this strange new pseudo-emulation weird 2600 VCS device. Anyway, this was Atari's last genuine home console built from the ground up to be a contemporary machine. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. Let's get a little bit of history in here about the Atari Jaguar. Now, the Atari Jaguar was launched in 1993 by Atari after it had finally withdrawn from the home computer market and ceased production of the Atari ST. This wasn't Atari's first attempt of the recent years to enter the video game market, given that they had also launched the handheld Atari Lynx system in 1989 to compete with the Nintendo Game Boy. Much like the Atari Jaguar, the Lynx was a failure, but that's another video for another day. Anyway, back to the Jaguar. So, in 1993, Atari launched the Atari Jaguar. It was released in the US in the November of that year, and in the European market in the summer of the following year, 1994. Now, contextually, the Atari Jaguar launched into a market where the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis for our North American friends, and the Super Nintendo were the dominant platforms in Western markets. Indeed, the 1993-94 period was probably the peak time for both of those systems, with such big hitting games as Sonic 2, Sonic 3, Sonic & Knuckles, Super Mario World, Super Mario Kart, Star Fox, etc., all being massive successes at the time. Now, Atari's Jaguar was intended to be a quantum leap over these machines, being a 64-bit system, but we'll get back to that in a second. And its only true competitor in terms of power was the 3DO, a system Atari themselves felt was beneath the Jaguar in terms of its abilities. As I said, Atari were claiming that their Jaguar was a 64-bit system, whereas Sega and Nintendo's offerings were 16-bit and the 3DO was 32-bit. However, there's some contention here. You see, the Atari Jaguar's hardware was quite interesting. It was built around a core of two custom chips nicknamed Tom and Jerry and the venerable Motorola 68000 CPU. Now, the Motorola 68000 was a fairly general purpose 16/32-bit CPU, which meant it could operate internally with a 32-bit bus, but more often than not externally on a 16-bit bus, but could operate on a 32-bit bus. Now, the contention around the 64-bit comes from the two custom chips and the data bus that they operated. Now, the Tom chip, which was one of the two processors, was based around a 32-bit RISC processor with 4K of internal RAM. It did pretty much everything in software, all the 3D calculations, graphical effects, etc. However, it had a 64-bit fixed function video processor, a 64-bit blitter which offered Z buffering and Gurad shading, and a DRAM control which had 8/16/32 and 64-bit memory management. This processor ran at 26.59 MHz. Its co-processor, Jerry, also ran at the same speed and contained a 32-bit RISC-based DSP, similar to the GPU but not quite. It was capable of producing 16-bit CD quality sound using 2 DACs, and the number of sound channels was only limited by the software. Full wavetable synthesis. It also had a clock controller and the joystick controller. The 68000 was supposed to just be used as a system management chip, but more often than not seems to be used as the CPU. Now, whilst at a 64-bit elements there. It is two 32-bit processors, which Atari claimed when you added them together and had them communicate over a 64-bit wide data bus, gave you a 64-bit system, which it kind of is, but it also kind of isn't. By that definition, you know, you could argue that the Sega Saturn was a 64-bit system. It doesn't really... Yeah, the Jaguar was not a 16-bit system. It was more powerful. Let's leave it at that, because I'm not getting into any arguments. Anyway, with these specs, theoretically, the Atari Jaguar could produce some quite solid software, especially in the new burgeoning 3D market. However, it really didn't, because, as I said, most developers saw the 68,000 and used that to handle the bulk of a game's code, and very few developers of the just 50 officially released software titles actually utilised the Tom and Jerry processors in the manner in which Atari intended them to. To be fair, most of the games that were released for the Jaguar in that list of 50 were absolute dross. They were terrible games. Believe me, if you've ever played Club Drive, you'll know exactly what I mean. Now, there were some good games, as we'll see, but realistically, what crippled the Jaguar wasn't the price like the 3DO, because it was a reasonably priced piece of hardware. You know, it launched in the US in the November of 1993 at $249.99, and it launched in the UK market at around about the same price, of a £250 to £300 marker. Now, this was significantly cheaper than the 3DO, but also more expensive than the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo. So yeah, the price wasn't really an issue. It was an acceptable price. What killed it was the software. Pretty much none of the major software houses supported the Jaguar. Its big third-party offerings came from Ubisoft. And yeah, let's be fair, Ubisoft, even then, were not the biggest and best of software companies, although, as you'll see, one of their titles was probably laid claim to being the Jaguar's killer app, even though it really didn't end up being much more exciting than a very fancy looking 16-bit game. But yeah, without the support of companies such as Electronic Arts, Capcom, Konami, Ocean at the time, you know, the Jaguar was doomed to failure from the start, because without recognisable brand name games, all Atari had were a handful of licenses, some new IPs, and falling back on their own arcade heritage, which by that time, you've got to think we're a decade past Atari's peak as a gaming company, and, you know, titles such as Breakout, Checkered Flag, they're not going to sell a system anymore. You know, it just wasn't going to happen. Anyway, let's have a look at some of these games, and you can see exactly why the Jaguar failed, but you'll also see a couple of examples of things that maybe were pretty good on the Jaguar and showed that the Jaguar had potential and promise in the hands of the right developers. So, let's get cracking and we'll look at the first game, a game I think shows the power of the Jaguar almost perfectly. So, kicking us off here is one of the Jaguar's best games. It's from Ubisoft and it's Rayman. Now, when you certainly saw this game in the magazines at the time, it did look incredible. The colour, the detail, it just looked stunning. And then when you saw it in action as well, it looked equally incredible. You know, this was what you thought games like Sonic and Mario looked like in your head when you were dreaming about them. But this was a real game. Unfortunately, despite looking incredible, sounding really good, and playing incredibly well, even though I'm incredibly bad at it, this wasn't what the market wanted. Realistically, this was a glorified 16-bit platformer. And with all the promises being made about the Jaguar, it just didn't fulfill them. This was not next generation gaming as people were seeing it. By this point, we were already seeing games like Virtua Fighter and Virtua Racing in the arcades. That's what people wanted. And despite it looking great, as I said, and sounding great, being beautifully animated, Rayman was not seen as being a next generation game. What was seen as being a next generation game though was Cybermorph, a game that many Jaguar owners got packed in with their system. In many ways, Cybermorph was like a more advanced take on Star Fox or Starwing, although not quite. I mean, for the time it looked fairly decent, if a little basic. You know, the Gurad shading and the flatness of the landscapes and lack of texturing certainly give it a basic look, but when you do compare it to the other options available on the market, such as Star Fox or Starwing on the Super Nintendo, Virtua Racing on the Mega Drive, you know, it was a lot faster, a lot smoother. It did genuinely look better than those games, but again, it didn't play brilliantly, to be fair, and it wasn't quite what people were expecting. It was a little basic, and whilst it was intended to show off what the Jaguar could do and did to an extent, it didn't have that impact that was required at the time, especially not when by this stage in 93, early 94, the PlayStation and the Saturn were on the horizon, and we were already seeing what it looked like they could achieve as home systems. Of course, this is far from the worst game on the system, as we're about to see, because, you know, it was a home console, and home consoles, you got certain types of games, and one of those games that was very popular at the time was the one-on-one fighting game. The Jaguar did have some, but yeah, well, let's just have a look, shall we? So, Sega had Virtua Fighter. The PlayStation, when it launched, would have Battle Arena Toshinden, and then Tekken. Atari had Fight for Life. And in stills it looked okay, but by God, is this a terrible game. In action, it looks slow and jerky, although the texture mapped graphics are pretty nice. It plays horrendously. The movement is slow, the collision detection feels off. This was never going to compete with Virtua Fighter or Toshinden or Tekken. It's not there. You can tell it wasn't really done by a team of coders as talented as those that worked on the aforementioned Sega and Namco and such titles. It's just a bad game. But amazingly, this was not the worst fighting game on the system. Oh no, that's coming next. Say hello to Kasumi Ninja, the Jaguar's equivalent to Mortal Kombat. Even the font looks like the Mortal Kombat font. That's how close they went. This is by far the best bit of the game. You get this lovely 3D textured environment to select your combatants in, which is pretty damn good looking, to be fair. Getting to the game, however, yeah, it just to be fair, it doesn't look much better than, say, the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat or Mortal Kombat 2. Again, it's slow, it's jerky, the controls just don't quite feel right, and again, it doesn't have that next generation leap that gamers expected. We didn't expect glorified 16-bit titles, we wanted 32-bit titles, and as we saw previously with Fight for Life, the ones we did get weren't great, and it could have been mitigated had titles like this been excellent and played well, but they didn't. Oh no. And this was far from the Jaguar's only attempt at a Mortal Kombat-esque fighting game, even given its limited 50-title library. Because there's also this game, Ultra Vortech. Ooh, it was a close call between this and Kasumi Ninja as examples of the worst titles on the Jaguar. I gave it to Kasumi Ninja because this one, well, whilst it doesn't look quite as bad, it's still bad, and it does play a tiny bit better. This for my money is the more playable of the two, and there's a couple of nice things going on there, like the little reflections of the fighters you can see, but it's still not a great game. It's a C-tier fighting game. You know, if Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat games are A-tier on the 16-bit systems, you had games like Eternal Champions on the Mega Drive that were B-tier. This is below that. It's not bad, but again, it's not what people were expecting with the jump to a next generation system at all. Now, the Jaguar version of Doom was promoted as being a killer app, and if I'm being completely honest, compared to, say, the Super Nintendo version or the 32X version or even the truly terrible 3DO version, this isn't a bad take on the game. It's not brilliant, but equally so, it's not so terrible that you want to gouge your eyes out and scream, "Why God, why?" after playing it, which is a fairly standard reaction to the 3DO and 32X versions. It's fairly fast and smooth, it runs full screen, it's not a bad game. It's not the best FPS on the Jag. I've not included the best FPS on the Jag here in this particular video because I want to do something separate on that, because obviously that's Aliens vs Predator, a game that many people would put right up there as one of the best games on the system, if not the best. I probably give the nod to Rayman over that, but we digress. But this is a pretty decent port, but unfortunately it just didn't prove to be a system seller. Now, there's one more game I'm going to show here which many people would say is the Jaguar's crowning glory. If you've guessed what it is, well done. If not, let's have a look and see. Yes, it's Jeff Minter's Tempest 2000, a game that gets mentioned pretty much every time somebody talks about the Jaguar. Whilst it doesn't show off every ounce of the Jaguar's power, this was more what people were expecting. Like Cybermorph, it's something that the 16-bit machines couldn't really do. You know, you could do a decent version of Tempest on the Mega Drive or the Super Nintendo if you wanted to, but you wouldn't get something as smooth and as polished and as playable as this. Was it what people wanted to see on a next generation system? Probably not. This was a hardcore gamers game for hardcore gamers, if you like, and it was never going to sell systems, no matter how good the reviews it received were, and they were good reviews, but it wasn't going to be a system seller, sadly. Even though it's there, you know, you've got the top 3 Jaguar games, which I would argue are Rayman, Aliens vs Predator, and this. Aliens vs Predator could have been a system seller, but arrived after the system's launch and wasn't good enough or on time enough to make the Jaguar any degree of a success. So that's some games, and it gives you an idea of where the Jaguar was at. If you think that the majority of the games that we've seen were not this standard, the software, but more on the Kasumi Ninja Ultra Vortech level, you'll have a pretty good idea as to why the Jaguar failed, because any system lives and dies based on its games, and the Jaguar's games in its 50 game library were the majority terrible. So there you have it, folks, my thoughts on why the Atari Jaguar failed. Now if you agree with me or if you disagree with me, tell me down in the comments. Don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you really enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button as well, maybe even ring the bell. And yeah, this is Rob saying thank you for watching. I truly appreciate it, and I will see you on the next 8/16/32-bit. Oh, by the way, don't forget my Ko-fi and Patreon pages. You'll see the links on the screen in a moment.